So we have an exciting topic here. We're going to do an IPv4 transfer market trends panel. I have four folks who are all fairly well known to this community. William Sylvester of Adrex, Mark Lindsay of Avenue 4, Jack Hazen of Hillcoast Stream Bank, and Mike Burns of IP Trading. Gentlemen, turn on your video. I want to see you all smiling faces. Okay, very good. I'm looking for one more. Here we go. One more. I got three video. Who am I missing here? Mike? No, I got Mike.
Jack, you're missing Jack because it says that the host has blocked me from.
There you go, Jack. We have you. Very good. Lovely. Okay. So, folks, I have these esteemed gentlemen before me. I have a number of questions, and I'm going to clarify it with each of them. And then what we're going to do is, if we get to the end and we still have time, I will take a few in the Q&A panel, but I'm not sure, given how many questions I have for these folks. First, would each of you, in turn, just 2 minutes, introduce yourself, your organization, sort of what you are and what you do. We'll start off with Mark. Go right ahead, Mark.
Thank you, John. My name is Mark Lindsay of Avenue 4. Been in the ARIN community working either as a lawyer or as a broker in this space since 2012-ish. Avenue 4 was formed in 2014, and Avenue 4 is dedicated to advising participants in the predominantly the ARIN region. We predominantly represent the sell side of the brokerage transaction, and we make clear that that's typically our approach to advising all of our clients.
Very good. I'll now have William Sylvester. Go ahead, Billy.
I'm William Sylvester from Adrex. We started pioneering market transfers in the fall of 2009. Have been very involved in the communities of working to open things up. Thank you so much for putting this on, John, and really appreciate you for putting this together.
Excellent. Mike Burns, tell me a little about yourself and your business.
Hi, I'm Mike Burns of IP Trading. My business was founded in 1986, so we're about 35 years old. We are a network operator who transitioned to become a broker. We began buying and selling blocks in the early 2000s, and we are a registered broker at all the trading registries. We represent buyers and sellers, and I think we'll talk more about this as trends go. We're finding buyers are in need of more representation than sellers these days. But we've been active in the market and in policy development in ARIN and in other communities, and we do a lot of interregional transfers. Excellent.
And Jack Hazen, a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Hi, Jack Hazen from IPv4 Global, a division of Hillcoast Stream Bank. I'm an executive vice president and principal of Hillcoast Stream Bank. Our IPv4 Global division started also around 2012. Started doing private transactions, and since then also launched an online platform so we have a multifaceted platform that both does online trades and as well as a private brokerage. We represent also buyers and sellers from time to time. I'd say most of our representations are of sellers, but we do have various buyer representations as well. When it comes to online transfers, everyone is sort of on their own, although our listings come from our sellers that we represent.
Okay, excellent intro. All right, gentlemen, you've all been in this industry sort of since it's been an industry. So who wants to address how has the transfer market changed in the last 5 years? In the last 5 years, what have you seen in the last 5 years?
I can take a quick
Go ahead, Mark.
Thoughts there. I'd say, 2015, 2016, it was predominantly a buyer's market. There was a lot of supply. Buyers were moving into the space clearly with more supply than there was demand, and found that a lot of the leverage from both a pricing and a terms and condition perspective landed on buyers. And around that 2015, 2016 period, that's when prices were absolutely the lowest in the market space. We saw prices dip as low as $5, $6 per number around that time period. And since then, as address space has become less available, we saw some dips periodically, particularly in 2000. We saw a steady incline in terms of transactions until we got to around 2016. Prices were relatively low up until that point in time. We saw a big dip in address space in 2016. And not with getting into the psychology of buyers and sellers, but there was a pivot at that point in time to say, okay, well, this really is a scarce resource. And there was a more balancing out of demand and supply. Prices spiked. Sellers had a bit more say in pricing and negotiating the transactional space. So since 2016, the leverage is increasingly shifting a bit more to a balanced buyer-seller. And now we're sort of seeing a bit more sell-side leverage on the transaction space. I would also say that there's probably, originally there was just kind of one market. It was periodic 16s up to 10s that would come into the market periodically. Now we're kind of divided up into, I'd say, 3 market segments, like the 19s and below, the 16s and collections of 16s, in the larger address space of /10s and larger. There's some fuzziness around those boundary points. But in the midpoints of 16s and larger, leverage is clearly shifting a bit more towards the sell side in terms of both setting price and a bit more balance in negotiation. But there's been a lot of consolidation amongst the buyers in that space. So there's a consolidation, a lot of deep experience on the buy side, with sellers having more leverage, but less experience on a per seller perspective.
Excellent summary. Okay, others, what are you seeing? Jack?
So I'd say one of the biggest changes in the market since I started is because of the growth of the market, the transparency and standardization of the process of getting trades done has increased dramatically. And so I think parties have much more comfort in the process, which I think is a result of a bunch of things. I think, back in 2012, the only way you would know how much an IP address is worth is, you Google it and you look up and all you knew was the Microsoft Nortel transaction. Now there's a lot of pricing data out there. All of my counterparts over here all put out reports on pricing, and so I think people out there just have more information, know more, and there's more comfort in doing a transaction. I think the RIRs have stepped up and developed policy and procedures that help support the transfer market, which gives people comfort. And they're actually able to, we do transactions with almost no paper. The only paper that sometimes has to get done for a transfer for us is the officer attestation form or the acknowledgement form. Other than that, everything is done through our platform back and forth. So I think that's come a long way and enables all of us to be able to do business a lot more efficiently and do more.
Mike, what are you seeing?
I'm definitely in concurrence with those opinions. The knowledge levels among participants, both buyers and sellers, are much higher now than they were 5 years ago, when we had to spend a lot of time educating participants who were often quite afraid of the market, considered it to be more of a black market than a white market, and they were very nervous about interactions with the registries and with escrow agents. And in the last 5 years, as Jack has said, there has been a standardization of escrow agents in the industry, with escrow.com really getting quite a lot of business. And many brokers, also the number of brokers has proliferated in the last 5 years. There are many more of them. And they are all become familiar with escrow.com, the way it works. And that has tended towards less paperwork involved in transfers, as Jack alluded to. When an online escrow agent is used, both the buyer and the seller engage in an agreement with that provider. And so the underlying agreement directly between the buyer and the seller is no longer really necessary. So we're finding that escrow agents have facilitated the market, have helped mature it, and have also assisted in multi-broker deals, which are also growing in popularity over the last 5 years. Of course, prices have gone up, wait times to sell have gone down, inventory has gone down, and actually we see commission rates have gone down as well.
To know. Billy, you've been in this market a while. What have you seen change?
So when we started in 2009, we found that roughly half of the internet was unannounced. And this was primarily legacy space. And that legacy space was either companies that didn't have a business ISP when they first got onto the internet in the early to mid 90s. Since then, you know, with the Nortel deal that we did in 2011, some of the other key landmark transactions in 2012, it's really started to raise awareness. And through the transfer markets over the last, not just the last 5 years, but the last decade, we've actually seen these numbers go from about 50% of the internet space being utilized to actually about 80%. And a lot of this is true. Companies are better managing, recycling, more efficiently using their IP space, but they're also planning for the future. They're budgeting. You know, 5 years ago, companies didn't have budgets for buying IPv4. Today, companies are looking at what's my 1-year plan, what's my 3-year plan. And that's really changed the dynamic. And, you know, a long time ago, there were concerns that this was illegitimate. It was, in certain cases, I can remember early calls where it was illegal. It was illegal, you're going to jail for selling IP addresses. Fortunately, today, everything is above board. The gray markets are above board. Policy has followed suit to mirror what's going on in the marketplace. And we're really able to keep the registries accurate. We're able to do efficient transfers, as everyone else on the panel has mentioned. ARIN has been great to work with, just in that relationship between buyers and sellers, and really verifying that companies who are selling and transferring are the legitimate companies, and really working on that fraud issue, because there is a lot of concern about making sure that we sell and do legitimate transfers. Long are gone the days where the tech contact had full control over the block. And now we're actually getting executives and lawyers and others involved. So it's been a very exciting time.
Excellent. You interesting point you raised, sort of the impressions of those you talk to. Each of you are on the phone talking to potential customers every day. What's the most common misconceptions today about the transfer market? Do you still have someone who says you're all going to jail, or what is out there that people, what misunderstandings do you most frequently encounter? Who wants to go first?
I'll mention one that we see, which is a real misunderstanding, which is that the broker is the buyer. And many times, you know, sellers or potential sellers will come to us and ask us, how much are we going to pay? How much are we going to get? And really what we've got to tell them is, look, we can't buy these addresses and resell them. We have to find you a buyer. And that's something normally that happens in the future. But that's one misconception. Others are that it's still a black market, that addresses can be revoked if they're not being used. And there's a lessening fear of interacting with the RIRs. I think that's kind of fading away in most registries.
Excellent, thank you. Jack, go ahead.
Sure. A couple of misconceptions. So first of all, I think a lot of the sellers out there have a misconception that they're going to do better dealing directly with a buyer rather than going through a broker. I think what we've seen in our experience is that when they do that, they usually end up netting less. And so I think the sellers out there should not be looking so much at what they're going to pay a broker to go out and find them buyers, but look at what you're going to net and look at the expertise and experience and services that you're going to get from a capable broker in helping you close a transaction, give you certainty of closing, help you with the process, help you with the knowledge and the paperwork. That's one misconception that I think is out there. A lot of times they're afraid to deal with the brokers. You should look at your bottom line. And the second misconception that I'm seeing out there is a lot of sellers think, and I think, John, you may have alluded to that, a lot of sellers think that they can only sell a Class B/16 block if it's fully cleared off. And they don't realize, and it's eye-opening to them when we tell them, no, you could sell subnets. You could sell a /24 and a /18. And in today's market, a /18, will get you a few or actually several $100,000 these days. So you don't have to clear off the whole block to go into the market.
Excellent. Anyone else like to talk about? Go ahead, Mark. Sorry, William. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the two main things that we see are first, when we call companies, most of the time these companies aren't aware that they have space at all. And they say, this sounds too good to be true. This is a scam. It's not legitimate. It's not worth losing my job over. So there's always that learning curve of saying, no, your company acquired these things back in the early, late 90s. They're worth something. We really want to put them back into circulation. It's going to help the internet. And we can motivate you with monetizing this to make it more worth your while. In certain cases, despite not having used these things for 10, 15, 20 or more years, you get departments, IT departments that raise their hand and say, hi, I haven't been using this for 20 years, but we need it. We really, really need it. And so there's a lot of those types of challenges that we see with regards to freeing up some of the space to transfer.
Excellent. Mark, you wanted to talk about challenges?
Yeah, I got two quick ones I'll make. One is I want to echo the point that Rick made, that there is, there's more information about pricing, but sellers don't have the same insight and information as do some of the repeat buyers. The other point I'll make is that there seems to be, with more information available, you historically had seen higher unit pricing for the smaller blocks. So a lot of 16-ish holders come and say, well, I can make more total returns by breaking this up into 24s and selling those all at once, and have a higher set of returns. And there are transactional costs associated with doing that. And as a general proposition, monetizing that many 24s, breaking up 16, isn't a slam dunk in terms of realizing a higher unit value than doing a 16 one and done. And the last one I'll make kind of is a part of the broker community. I think ARIN has done a decent job of making clear that the facilitator list is a list. It's not an indication of quality or experience, but I think I consistently get potential clients who view those on that list, the brokers on that list, having been qualified, vetted, a deep bench of experience, and they're only there if they've got some sort of high level qualification. And I don't know what to do about that, but they do still seem to think that that is some indication of quality and experience, when in reality, that's not what it's for.
Excellent. Good to hear. So let me sort of take it. You guys have some deep experience, which those answers talk about. What sort of when you're talking to people about these transactions and they come to you with their own strange ideas, one of the things that you've got to do is talk to them about what's important in a transaction. And in particular, you're doing agreements to buy and sell rights. What's important terms to have in those agreements? They don't know. You must know. Who wants to talk to that?
I'd be happy to jump on that. My sort of attachment to this space began as a lawyer advising people around their rights and engaging with ARIN, and then their transactional documents. And we still think, escrow.com plays a role, but we think for mid-sized and larger transactions, there's no substitute for actually having parties negotiate appropriate terms and conditions, allocate risk and responsibility. And the nature of what you're buying and selling has always been a delicate issue in this space. And the reps and warranties, oftentimes that sellers are asked to give buyers, can go well beyond the recognized rights and responsibilities that they may otherwise have. So we have a certain position as to whether IP addresses are proper and you can have title, but oftentimes you'll see reps and warranties that say this seller is conveying title. You don't want to have your contract be conditional on making reps and warranties that go further than you can actually demonstrate to be true. So we think now we're tailoring those reps and warranties to convey what you can rightfully convey to a buyer and that the buyer can rightfully claim I'm getting something of value. So getting those right. The reps and warranties are oftentimes coupled with an indemnification. If there's a breach of that rep and warranty, what liability does the seller then have? So making sure those indemnifications and reps and warranties are time bound and that you don't have an evergreen set of obligations as a seller. And as a buyer, also kind of making sure that those reps and warranties are what are appropriate for this space, and not have a contingent liability for sellers that go well beyond the closing of the transaction. And then there's always some discussion about limitations of liability. What is the maximum exposure you have if this thing goes wrong? We've not had many transactions, or any of our transactions go wrong, but as lawyers on either side, there's always some maximum exposure point, right? Want to look at what the maximum exposure point is. And buyers want uncapped liability for the sellers, and sellers want no more liability than the dollars are getting in the transaction. So figuring out where that balance is effective. And that's sort of your commoditized transaction. Bigger transaction have more complexity in terms of phased releases and how you put time boundaries around those, how you isolate liabilities around each individual phase. If there's any SLAs on the seller in terms of when they deliver address space, those become more commercial items. The rest of the asset purchase agreement for buyers and sellers who go through an intermediary or buyers who would be buyers, we kind of have a known set of boundary conditions, and there's always fights around certain issues, but those are the ones we typically have to navigate.
Excellent. Someone else want to talk about things you worry about in terms and conditions?
Sure, John, I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I'll jump in. Yeah, we've found that the normal items for discussion in contracts are related to the venue for dispute resolution, which we've never had any dispute that needed any resolution. But we've also found that certain governments, when they engage as buyers or sellers, require indemnification language that sometimes is a little bit aggressive. So we have to be careful when dealing with those. But I would like to put brackets around this discussion by saying that, repeating that we've never had a dispute. I'm never even aware of a dispute. The structure of these transactions involves a third-party escrow agent whom both the buyer and the seller have placed their trust in. And both the buyer and the seller are also just paying for an authoritative decision of the registries. And so if the registry makes the decision, there's really very little that can be disputed. And if the registry doesn't make the decision, well, the money is returned. The presence of the escrow agent obviates many of the payment reasons as sources of dispute. And the presence of the authoritative decision maker in the registries removes many of the other dispute causes. So we find that our contracts are getting slimmer over time.
Got it. Jack, did you want to say something? I didn't know if I got Mike by accident. Were you in queue?
No. I to further what Mike is saying, because the registries and ARIN does a very, very thorough vetting of these transfers before they go through, and because and just based on the fact that I've never seen disputes post closing either. People have gotten more and more comfortable doing these transactions without paper based on the terms and conditions on our site. I think that happens because of the comfort level in what happens in the transfer process, and it involves escrow. And yes, there's a third-party escrow agent, and so the funds are held, and once the transfer is done, you have the addresses registered in your name, and people are doing /16s on our site now. So, we started it with really small transactions, but people are getting comfortable. Having said that, the much larger transactions with some of the larger players still need to be papered, and so and we have the same terms and conditions that get negotiated that Mark and Mike had mentioned.
Billy, did you want to speak to this at all?
I did. The number one thing I would say is verify holdership. And I know we've talked about this, but especially for uncontracted blocks that are not under RSA, you really need to do your research to make sure that the parties that you're contracting with, the contracts aren't worth anything if they're not the actual legitimate holder. And so you need to verify who they are. We've talked about escrow. Escrow is incredibly important. The biggest thing is making sure you either, as a seller, have your block or you're getting paid, or as a buyer, you have either your money or you get the block. And within that, you need to make sure that the registry is updated accurately. You need to make sure that who is reflects that you're the holder. Many years ago, there were some parties, we never participated in this, that were doing contracts outside of the registry. And those have created major headaches in all the RIRs for trying to clean some of that up and reflect accurate registries and accurate databases. But if you find yourself in a situation not using escrow, you're sitting around waiting to see if you're going to get paid. And I've talked to a number of companies who have conducted transactions with third parties where they were holding their breath to see if they were getting paid. And in some cases, they ran into problems, or the deal or transaction fell apart after 6 or 9 or 12 months. And it's just, as an organization, either buyer or seller, making sure that the blocks are ready to sell, are clear, they're free of spam, and that you verify that holdership and leveraging escrow to protect you. And those are the things that are most important.
Let me come back. You were talking about waiting for something to happen, and I imagine that's a situation that you face with customers, that all of you face with customers on both ends. What would you say, Billy, is your average wait time? And I'm going to ask it from 2 points of view.
Sure.
Someone out there needs addresses for their network. They come to you and they say,
Sure.
I need addresses. Mr. Sylvester, can you get me some? From when he contracts with you to when he sees them, how long is he waiting on average?
Well, so, I mean, the actual time deals in contracts, it deals in escrow, it deals in funding. There's a lot of things that go into this. And then once you get through those different pieces, now you've also have to include the registry. And just, I want to make a statement. ARIN and the registration desk have always been phenomenal, especially with the many challenges provided by COVID, at being responsive and working with us, and even requiring documentation that perhaps was missed, or a signature was missed somewhere, those types of things. So these timelines are not dependent on the registry. For us, pre-COVID, we were seeing 2 to 3 business weeks from the time someone would come in, contract. This requires you have a motivated buyer and seller. It requires money gets released quickly. There are many challenges with regards to wire transfers, especially internationally, funding transactions quickly, getting ARIN fees paid quickly. That's actually a huge problem for a lot of organizations. And ARIN recently has done several things to make that easier, which has been greatly appreciated. But getting the proper signed documentation in, and then of course, getting that through. Post-COVID, that's been a little bit longer. And this has really been the result of buyers and sellers, everybody's working remote, getting contracts reviewed seemed to take longer. And so recently it's been more in that 4 to 8 business week sort of timeline. But assuming there's space available, it's been prepared, it's clean, there's no spam, it's ready to go. They've either done their 8.2 to make sure that it's in their name. Assuming you have that ready to go, a buyer can come in and within a few weeks have their space, if not quicker.
Got it. Would anyone else like to talk about turnaround times on average?
That's it.
I see Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
It's about the same, I'd say.
Mark, speak to your speaker, because you're breaking up.
Me now? Better?
Better.
Yes. So I'd say that the only thing I would add is that our our turnaround times are about the same. I said 1.5 to 2 months at most in current situation. Building about a week of due diligence, it's assuming everybody is doing the right thing, moving quickly, and about a week to 2 for contract negotiations, right? That for the larger transaction, that still is a part of contract review and sign off, still has to happen. That's about a week to 2, depending on how buyers and sellers are situated. But we come out about 1.5 to 2 months from the time somebody signs up with us, the time a deal is closed.
Got it. Jack, Mike, either you want to comment on turnaround times?
Yeah, I mean, I think our times are roughly the same. I would like to mention that, you know, not every registry has the same speed of processing. And I don't put ARIN as number 1 in speed of processing. But I will just talk about when transfer durations stretch out, all kinds of problems get introduced, especially in a time when prices are changing quickly. So we always try to get the transfer times down to reduce those kind of problems, because we see buyers and sellers see other prices, they want to back out, somebody's moving a little slowly. And so it's to everybody's benefit to get this whole thing done efficiently and speedily. But our times are just the same as have been described.
Jack.
Sure. We see similar times, although if someone buys on our site, we literally sometimes have deals closed in a matter of days. If everyone has their ducks in a row. And when I say ducks in a row, just some advice to buyers and sellers, right? A buyer, get pre-approval at ARIN for what you're buying. One of the things that we see, if you need to get internal vendors set up to be able to pay the purchase price, get that in advance, get yourself set up, get us or whoever your escrow agent is set up in your system in order to be able to pay them in a timely manner. And if you're a new ARIN member, make sure you get yourself set up with getting an RSA signed. Those are some of the things that we see delay on the buyer side. And on the seller side, obviously make sure you have clear title and that's cleaned up. And we work with we work with a seller to do that in advance of listing. Clean up blacklisting, routing, route objects, and also have a corporate officer ready and able to sign the attestation form. A lot of times that form, like everything's done and then, oh, we can't find the right officer to sign it. So those are some things that if you prepare in advance, these could move a lot faster.
Good to know. Okay, I'm going to actually turn this a little inside for a moment. I just warning, John Sweeting and Richard Jimerson, take out your pads of paper and your pencils. Get ready. The writing's about to begin. Gentlemen, you just talked about delays and the paperwork and the issues. What can ARIN do to internally as an organization? What can we do to do a better job with transfer processing? Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Go, Mike, go.
All right. So one of the things we think could be made easier is seller pre-approvals. Many sellers are totally unaware that they can do this. And with the STLS defunct, it's kind of been a, redheaded stepkid. So I think that ARIN should, play up the fact that sellers can get pre-approved. Also, I think that we should be allowed to submit the officer seller attestation with the ticket submission, because it's pointless to just wait 2 days for ARIN to come back, and it's going to have to come at a certain point. And if it never is needed, then tear it up, throw it out, delete it. I would say that also we're finding it. There's a 2-day turnaround for each ARIN communication, which comports with the ARIN standards, but it's still too long. We think it should be shorter. We think maybe some of the new money from the potential fee changes should go to transfer staff to help to speed that up. And of course, working remotely is going to slow down. We understand that. But our experience with other registries has been more efficient.
Okay, good to know. Others?
I'd just piggyback on that. I'd say that if you could parallel stream a couple of things. One is the acknowledgement attestation, the billing. If that could all be done like initial submission, you can cut out roughly 4 days, sometimes 4 business days from the process. We oftentimes get our sellers queued up to have that all ready to go, but each step is almost happens in serial. So that could happen in parallel. That would dramatically cut down some of these times. I would also say, I know it's a bigger ask, but for a lot of sellers and buyers who might be new to this process, having the ability of their designated representative, whether it's their broker, their lawyer, to engage with ARIN on their behalf would be helpful. Like right now, you actually have to have an individual who's a POC engaging with ARIN online. If there's a mechanism to allow for agency, that would be very helpful.
Okay, others? Jack,
Oh,
William?
sure, I'll jump in. I mean, some of the things that have been pointed out, there are definitely some efficiencies. The notarization requirements, especially for parties that do multiple transactions with ARIN, there's some areas of efficiency that can be found in notarizing something once, not having to notarize something every single time, especially when it's sort of a known party. Is the notarization even necessary? There's certain contract terms that exist within, for example, the officer attestation, that for large organizations, it's very difficult to get signatures. And as you line up the signatures, as others have sort of designated, things tend to get signed all at once. And when you have something that says, hi, I'm agreeing to this ticket, but the ticket didn't exist when I signed this, it creates a conflict. So our ability to have a contract that more accurately reflects the situation that says, hi, we've made this request as an organization. We're authorizing this request to take place. I've got my designate, my affiliate, my otherwise party of someone in my organization, or my legal representative that's able to conduct business on behalf of me. Those are important areas that we can fix this. Obviously, payment, being able to pay in line, upfront, being able to pay on account, enabling third parties to pay more easily without the handshake of getting the email, getting the invoice 24 hours later. I know that many of these things have been addressed or are being addressed, and we really appreciate the focus that's been placed on that, because those things alone create huge delays in the process. The other thing for inter-RIR transfers, it's a very manual process today, and that's a huge pain point. And within that pain point, being able to better automate or otherwise programmatically update things, as there are certain APIs that exist for dealing with a single registry, but having an API based on SMTP or email for folks is a very asynchronous way to conduct a transfer that, had the RAR system been built a year later and had ARIN not been divested from Network Solutions in 1997, but instead in 1998, we would have had a protocol called RRP, and that protocol, which has IETF support for IP addresses, ASNs, and other network-related objects. We would have had that API built back in the late 90s, but because ARIN split from Network Solutions, they didn't get the benefit of the registrar split that happened in 98 when ICANN was created. So those are things that would be helpful for us in the future.
Okay, good to hear.
I do have
Go
one.
ahead, Jack.
Yeah, sure. I second a lot of these suggestions, although for a lot of them we've found through ARIN workarounds to more or less get to some of the points that everyone was raising. But one thing that I thought would be interesting, I know it was discussed earlier in the conference that there's a new premium service model being offered to some of the larger holders. And it would be great if you could do something similar for some of the intermediaries that are working a lot of transactions and giving us some type of capability to have a consistent conversation or consistent person at ARIN that deals with a lot of our transfers. And it would, I think it would help make the communication on transfers that intermediaries are involved in a lot smoother.
Okay, good to know. That's good feedback.
We're
All
not
right,
willing to pay for that.
Yes,
Go ahead, Mike, you had one more?
I have one that Sweeting should put in his notes. You should not hold up a transfer waiting for the buyer's initial fee.
Not hold up a transfer, waiting for the buyer's initial fee.
To be paid.
Okay,
Just put
okay.
it on the account, let them pay it whenever they want to pay it, but don't hold the transfer up for that.
Okay.
Because, just the time it takes for executing a payment is sometimes too long for these companies.
Acknowledged. Okay, we'll take all those. We'll see what we can do. Now, let me ask one that's outside of my control. This one's more for the members of the ARIN and the community to think about. Folks, what can be done from a policy perspective to make transfers easier? We've had a number of policy changes over the years. Is everything all set now? Everything's great? Who wants to go first?
John, I'll take this one.
Go right ahead.
So we see challenges in making sure that we have an accurate and updated registry. We need policies that help support updating of this data, but then also speaking to the fitness of the data. So for example, ARIN is the steward of a lot of legacy data. And within that stewardship, that data in many cases hasn't been touched, but there's nothing that identifies that data as not having been touched, except for that one day in 2011 when all of the records were touched. As a system-wide update, and it becomes very, very confusing. There are certain designations that are unofficial to determine whether you've signed an LRSA, but there's no designations to show that you signed an RSA. There's also no understanding of which contract or contract versions were signed, or even making those contracts available to make that more clear, open, transparent in the community, to provide that. Equally, there are realities that are going on in the marketplace where you have encumbrances. You might have someone who is leasing, you might have someone who is financing, you might have a buyer is different than a user, is different from, in the old days, we used to have internet service providers, you had upstreams, downstreams, and most of the models for where we exist today are reflecting of that. You had allocated space and direct space. Times are changing. There are many things going on in the community that we need to be able to accurately reflect that in the registry to show that within the registry, this party is a bank. They're not an ISP. Do they need to have pre-approvals to, this is a court that took over some blocks due to fraud, or some government agency as a result of certain problems relating to a lawsuit. ARIN follows the directions from those entities, but in certain cases, it's very difficult to see what's going on in the registry. And I think that looking and exploring policies that mirror reality are things that we should consider a good use of our time going forward.
Okay, I got some notes for ARIN's operations and registry information in there as well, but the policy aspect is what I'm trying to focus on now. Anyone else want to talk about changes to policy? Is NERPM perfect the way it is, or are there particular changes you want to see? Mike?
Yes, I would remove the needs test from transfer policy. It is not needed to conserve address space, and we have an example in RIPE that we can look at for years and see that none of the problems that were always described as the reason for keeping the needs test in place have materialized over there. And second, I think that the 12-month resale waiting period needs to be eliminated. The presence of that waiting period precludes the natural development of a tiered delivery system with warehouses, with inventory, with distributors, where an efficient buyer and seller of addresses could buy addresses and sell them efficiently, taking benefit of their vast experience. I don't think that the anti-flip fear is a justification for the holding period. I think that addresses should be treated as much as possible like property, and should have all the rights and abilities that attend to property match addresses to reduce the problems down the road, such as William is describing with encumbrances. If we put everything into a legal framework and treat it as if these were analogous or as close to property rights as possible, we'd be better off.
Knowledge, anyone else want to speak to what we can do to make it easy in policy, what we can do to make it easier to transfer appropriate transfers? Go ahead. Jack, Mark, you want to pick up on either of the comments that Mike or William said?
Second, the flip issue is not something that we've seen meaningfully impair our sellers and buyers. I do think it is kind of a reaction to speculation that we really haven't meaningfully seen. And to the extent that there is some speculation, it's not with people holding transiently and then selling. It is a different form for which there is no policy to prevent. But I do think that the needs justification has mostly been an impediment for new entrants who are having difficulty navigating, don't fully understand how they can get smaller space. So it's been mostly an impediment for newer entrants and small acquiring entities. Those larger experienced buyers with the ARIN community are able to navigate around all that. So we do think eliminating needs would allow for a bit more equity for buyers to get address space. I do think that's one that we've probably gotten to a point in time where the market efficiencies will take care of itself. There's ways to find bad actors, and we don't really need to continue to have that apply to any meaningful category of address space and not artificially cut it off at a certain block size.
I'm going to move. Oh, Jack, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, sure. A couple of seconds. I mean, look, we've sort of stayed away usually. I think maybe people have noticed that we're usually quiet during the policy on transfers at the conferences. I don't know. We sort of it's obviously anything that makes transfers easier to happen is better for us as intermediaries because we'll get more transfers done. It'll be easier. But sure, I think though, to further Billy's point, at a minimum, if we could have the knowledge, right? If someone has an interest in a block of addresses, be it a financing party, right? Even though you don't treat it as property or you do treat it as property, if a lender has an interest and wants to somehow file a UCC saying that we have an interest in this block, I think it would benefit all the parties. It just makes things clearer, more knowledge. To Billy's point, if a block is under an RSA or an LRSA, you could find out, the holder can find out by asking ARIN, but it would be easier for everyone if you could just go into the database and know what the status is of space vis-a-vis the relationship between the holder and ARIN. All of those things would make transactions clearer and more, it lends more towards the transparency that I spoke about at the beginning of this panel.
Got it. Okay, excellent. I'm going to move on to questions from the audience. We got a few minutes left. So Kevin Bloomberg asks, is the quality of IP address space still have similar concerns to it had in the past? What has been done to improve the cleanliness of blocks on the market?
Well, I can speak to that. Okay, we haven't, I don't think, discussed what's really going on in the market, which is there's a severe shortage of blocks to sell, and prices are going up very quickly. That's probably something that most people watching this are interested in, but prices are going up very quickly. So that's of most interest, I would say.
I would add
Okay,
that
Mark?
related to the point Mike is making is that because address space is getting scarce, what you're finding out is that you have to dig a little deeper to find address space. So early on, it was easy to transact around space that was registered to the registrant. There's no complexity, no use. As we get more and more into the deeper territory of less freed up space, we find ourselves having to do a lot more work, either rejecting or helping sellers understand what their position is and going through a variety of hops to get them registered if they in fact are the proper registrant. So we're finding out that there is, good or bad, that there's a lot of address space held by companies that are no longer operational or acquired and assets been acquired. So the intermediary space is spending a lot more time trying to get that sort of what appears to be abandoned address space to a proper holder so they can transact with ARIN. So it is more work. We do think that that is contributing in a positive way to what we're seeing as, from ARIN's perspective, is more RSAs coming into existence. But it is harder now to kind of get that address space in a proper position to sell.
Got it. Anyone else? Jack?
Well, I guess the inverse to that is, and you know, we don't generally offer space until it's gone through that process. And so a lot of times, you know, if you have space that went through a process of clearing it through ARIN, through an 8.2 transfer, or just through getting the name properly changed, once it's gone through that process, you have a lot more confidence in the cleanliness of it. And so it's actually, you know, so it actually has led to clearer records and more people being able to buy space with more confidence.
Ben Bitfield of T-Mobile brought up an interesting question. Let's say you've got a lot of address space you've been using for a long time, but you've got holes in it. You've got a huge amount of address space, but you've got some holes. Is it worth to renumber, say, to try to clear out an entire /14 rather than monetizing the /16s you have spaced throughout? i.e., is the price higher for a contiguous block than smaller multiple blocks? Who wants to talk about that?
John, I'll take this one.
Sure.
So the thing that we always encourage parties to maintain aggregation of numbers if at all possible. The larger blocks are definitely more rare. There was a time where I think that there wasn't a differentiation. I would argue that individual 16s in many cases are demanding less money on a per IP number basis today than many of the larger blocks, just because the larger buyers going after those larger blocks, looking for contiguous blocks, are willing to pay a little bit more for not having the hassle of putting together 16, 32, 64, 128, 16 individual transactions, each with their own contracting processes, negotiations, things like that. So there's value that's found there. But anytime that you have some space that's not in use that you can make available, it's best to aggregate that the best that you can and sell it in the largest blocks that you can.
Go ahead, Jack.
I would say that you need to do a cost-benefit analysis, really. You know, we're seeing more and more transactions happen on the smaller blocks, and a lot of the expenses of doing multiple transactions often are borne by the buyers in any event. So at some point, it depends how much it's going to cost you to renumber. It's easy to sell /16s, and you could sell /18s, 19s, and 20s also, and get a similar return. We sort of see a pendulum going on the pricing, right? Like we'll see small blocks trade at, let's say, $30 an address, and the /16s are at 26. But once those transactions happen, a few rounds on the smaller blocks, we see the /16 catch up to it. There's definitely a premium if you could clear. We see it in the very large space, right? If you could clear a /12, you could clear a /13, a /14. I think you'll see a premium for that. But less than that, I think the market pretty much has adjusted and really they follow each other.
Okay, we're winding down here. The panel, I have room for one or two more questions. Aaron Hughes, 6 Connect, says, thank you all, an excellent panel. He's happy to see this kind of content. As for the question he asks, all of you have to do contracts. So he'd like to ask, how do you define in your contracts an IP address block? What do you say it is? Who wants to go first? Mike?
Yeah, we identify it as all rights and privileges to a block defined in the CIDR notation in the ARIN WHOIS database.
Okay. Anyone else?
I say that we add,
Mark?
yeah, what we do is we do say that you do have some exclusive rights, and those exclusive rights relate to the entry in the registry of record following policy. You do get the right to designate those IP addresses for routing purposes, and the seller, reps and warrants that they have those exclusive rights. We sort of try to stay away from going, as I mentioned before, of going so far as to say that there's title to that property, but you do have it in the forms of contract rights that are exclusive to the rightful registrants. And that is those that are commensurate with having an exclusive entry in the RIR database and the ability to route those and have those routed by your ISP of choice.
Okay, anyone else?
I'll take this one, John.
Go ahead.
So we describe it as all rights, title, and interest. As we started looking at this market in the fall of 2009 and early 2010, this was one of the biggest questions of how to describe this. There's property, which we've heard here, but clearly it's not property because in the ARIN contracts, it's not called property. Within that, though, what we found is we're transferring all rights, title, and interest, which means as a seller, anything that I have is what I'm selling. So whatever it is, without defining what it is what gets sold. This looks an awful lot like IP as in intellectual property, not as in internet protocol, but it finds itself being primarily transferred as a contractual right. So if I've signed an RSA, I am selling any rights that I have to that RSA within the ARIN region. In other regions, it's a little different, but within ARIN, I'm selling that contractual right. So the idea that I'm selling all rights, title, and interest is all rights, title, and interest to the contractual right that I have as a result of signing that contract with ARIN.
Understood.
Yeah, our contract has.
Go ahead, Jack.
Our
Go ahead.
contract has similar language, all right, title, and interest. All right, title, and interest, what do we say? In certain IPv4 internet protocol addresses, and we list them. And then in the reps and warranties, we just make sure that we state that it's subject to whatever rights the regional internet registries have in those numbers as well.
Excellent. So we're coming to our final question. And it's Mr. Owen DeLong, who asks, is it necessarily a good thing for the community in general, not just for the people who profit from it, to make transfers easier?
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at this one, right? So I think that
Go ahead, Mark.
yes, we're ideally brokering two parties of interest, right? We didn't create the demand, but there are clearly network operators who feel that V4 is essential to their ongoing operations, and there are clearly address holders who have excess V4 space that they're not using. So the question isn't for the brokers who are facilitating, satisfying the demand of ISPs, cloud providers, network operators. There clearly is a decision has been made amongst network operators that V4 address space is where they're going to continue to operate their networks. So yes, we think as long as a business who believes it is in their economic interest and their commercial interest to operate a V4 network, that there should be a mechanism to take those addresses that are being unused and put them into the highest possible use for those network operators who continue to believe V4 address space is important to their extension, their part of the internet.
Got it. Anyone else?
I'd like to address that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
I would just say the community voted on this and they passed a transfer policy. They want transfers to happen. It boggles the mind to think they would want transfers to happen inefficiently. And the question was how we would want this market to be more efficient. And yes, it will make our lives easier and maybe makes it more profit for us. But really, it's the community that wants transfers. We're just here executing the community's wishes.
Acknowledged. Jack, William?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I think to Mike's point, that the process definitely should be as easy as possible. If you want to, you don't want to slow down trade with inefficiencies. Sure, if the community wants to make it more difficult, quote unquote, to do transfers because they feel that there's fraud or something like that, yeah, you shouldn't hold back on any of the steps that are necessary to make sure that everything that's being done is proper. But as far as efficiencies, I mean, there's a market, and all of the players are on both sides are part of the community, and we shouldn't put hurdles in the way of getting deals done.
Acknowledged. William?
I'll finish up with this one. A little bit different perspective. Economically speaking, the price that's getting paid doesn't necessarily, while there are parties that are enriched, many times, where's the money going? It's to cleaning up these networks that had no budget to clean them up, to make them available to providers that need them. As we work to adopt IPv6, IPv4 is still a predominant protocol, and it's still very necessary. And even as IPv6 is adopted, the V4 networks are still going to exist for quite some time. So the parties in the community that's part of this industry that leverages these different protocols is going to continue to need some of these resources. And by making an economic argument to management of certain organizations, it enables them to re-engineer their networks, clean their networks up, transition that space over to other third parties who could better utilize the space more consistently with the policy of the community. So what we've done is we've taken, as we started off early, I mentioned that in 2009, prior to transfer markets being as vibrant as they are today, half of the internet on IPv4 was being used. In 10 years, we've increased that by close to 30%. So now that we're about 80% of that utilization, and granted, we're talking BGP, and there are other obscure protocols and things like that that could be argued, but in the end, this is giving an economic benefit to parties to be able to re-engineer their networks and to do cloud migrations, to keep the internet growing and functioning efficiently. And that's in the best interest of the entire community.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. We're now over time, so I'm going to wrap this up so I don't cut into everyone's break. Thank you all for joining us. I think it's the audience has found it wonderful, and I hope to see you all again at another ARIN meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And great to see everyone.
I'm now going to transition us into break. We have a break, and we're going to go. That's a great question. Can we get all of the break events done and resume by 2:10? I'm asking staff.
Yes,
We're okay. So we're on break. We're breaking now for 21 minutes, and we're hoping to resume with the operations update at 2:10 p.m. Eastern time. Stay around for the break if you want to be for the stretch. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.